Okay, so brilliant. Thank you. Welcome to today's session on keeping children safe in education, looking at the updates for 2023. I'll do some quick introductions for Emma and me, and then we'll take a look at the Keeping Children Safe in Education document for this year. I'll take you through the key updates and some important reminders. But I really do welcome you making comments throughout the session, asking questions and sharing. And I will seek to make sure at appropriate intervals that I stop and pause to allow that to happen. But I do want to give a good bit of time towards the end for sharing good practice, sharing thoughts, and I really welcome you to feel that this is a safe space in which to kind of say, well, I'm not sure about this, or what do you think of this or that or the other, because it really benefits everybody. So Emma and I will bring the benefit of our experience of having worked in safeguarding teams for many years ourselves, and the work that we do now to support people across the education sector. But really, you also will have tons of stuff that you can bring to this, and sharing in your thoughts, planning, and queries that you have. Let's see if we can get some of those things resolved this morning. So an introduction to who we are. I founded the Essential Training Company back in 2016 when I was still working in education. I'm now a coach and consultant to the education sector, and Emma has been working with me for a good number of years. Prior to working with me in the Essential Training Company, she worked with me in our days at South Staffordshire College when she was part of my safeguarding team. And I got to know, of course, how incredibly tenacious and dedicated she is. And I love working with her. So you can see us there celebrating the 7th birthday of the Essential Training Company this summer. I myself was a DSL in education for 15 years, working in 4 different colleges. This is I'm still getting used to it being this time of year and not being the person that's kind of sat where you are, needing to make sure that all of this stuff is implemented. But it's precisely because I know what that feels like that I want you to be supported as much as possible in getting ready for the year ahead, and understanding what the key changes to keeping children safe in education are, and sharing amongst this group what we can do to best be getting ready for that. So I previously was an SLT lead for student services and quality for many years, was a chair of a PRU management committee, which I loved, and I'm now the trustee of a national charity and safeguarding lead for it. So safeguarding is kind of my world, really, which I love, along with Emma. And these are some of the core things that we do, supporting the education sector with everything to do with safeguarding around training, both for staff, sometimes for students, and certainly for governors, and supporting people in supervision so that they can review safeguarding cases and develop best practice. And we do consultancy and audits as well. So that's just a bit about us. And now it's time to think about kickoff. So as I'm sure you will be aware, we had the release of Keeping Children Safe in Education 2023 back in June, but today is the day that it comes into effect. And I'm sure that you've got tons of stuff ready for action, but I do know from experience there were always a few last minute things to be checking on, making sure about, before we could actually do anything. So I hope that today's session will either reassure you that you've got what you need and you're on track for all of that, or will help with a few reminders of stuff that might need to be done and rounded off. And you might need some stuff signed off by governors, an updated child protection policy, and so on. But we'll take a look at that, and I'm sure you're poised, ready to be thinking, okay, what else might you need to do that isn't already ticked off the to-do list in terms of kickoff for keeping children safe in education. So a reminder, as if some of you need reminding, I know, but it applies to all schools and colleges. It's for head teachers, principals, senior management teams, teachers, all staff, to be aware of the contents of keeping children safe in education. And amongst that, of course, people have different levels of responsibility. Governing bodies, indeed proprietors of private training establishments, Management committees of pupil referral units, alternative provision also need to be aware of this. It sets out the legal duties for everybody working with children in education, that's those under the age of 18, to know what they must or should be doing. And it's really, really important, vital, that all school and college staff have read part one. So we've got the separate document, part one here, which is available as a standalone document, as well as being embedded as guidance within Keeping Children Safe in Education. Now, I know from experience that although that's one simple line, that all school and college staff should read part one, that making sure that happens in practice can be a real challenge. And so my first question to you, actually, because I think it's a really important one, is going to be around how do you make sure that this actually happens? Because it's key in terms of all of these elements you see here, providing safeguarding information, the background to broader safeguarding environment, work that we need to do to embed safeguarding, and provides really detailed information for school and college staff on what they should know, what they should be looking out for, what they should do if they have any concerns about a child, a staff member, or safeguarding practices. So I welcome your feedback on this, because I will be honest, and I always am when it comes to safeguarding. In some of the institutions I've worked in, trying to get this done uniformly and swiftly at the start of term, when we were looking at a staff workforce of over 600 people, was a challenge. And I just really welcome contributions at this point, actually, in terms of how you're going about it, or how you did go about it last year or in previous years, that was particularly effective, that you might want to share with peers here today, so that everybody kind of has the best chance of doing this, because it can feel sometimes, I remember, like herding sheep. So anybody particularly want to share on this point? If you do, feel free to raise your hand. Emma, are you able to see people at the moment? Okay, smashing. Anybody want to share how you've been able to either do it effectively? Liz, yes, please, over to you.
Hi, everybody. As a minimum, as the staff return to work, the documents of Keeping Children Safe is sent out via HR. There is a mechanism where we ask that all staff tick on the system to say they've read it, but there's also a quiz. Now, what we do then is analyse the quiz, and if we get some strange responses or we're not happy, then I will start to call those members of staff in, and we have that further discussion about it, just to make sure that we've covered, and we make sure that we hope that our staff understand. So that's what we do at the beginning of September.
That's fabulous. Thank you. How long do you give people to pick to say they've read it and do the quiz, so that you're kind of testing, have they really, and do they understand?
Now, I need to double check with HR, but it's usually fairly swift. So we'd expect responses to be in sort of a week or so once staff have started. And then we start chasing to see who hasn't responded, because that again is signifying concerns.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And it's great that you're working with the HR team to get that done as well, because it's quite a significant piece of work, isn't it, operationally at the start of the academic year?
So absolutely, it's a lot of staff. We need to make sure everybody's covered, and it's easy for things to go wrong.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Much appreciated. Connell, I can see your hand up. Good morning.
Hi, we have all our staff in on the first inset day, and that is purely all the safeguarding training that day. So I will be doing a presentation on keeping children safe in education with our trust's documents that have just come out ready for it. They'll get to read it, part 1 and A. And then after they read each document, there is a quiz. We use TES Educare training program, and there's a quiz on each one, which they have to do. So we will do that as a whole staff, but it's individually that they have to do the quiz. And if there's any problems from that, then I can address it on the actual day.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. And I hope that's helpful for some of you as well, because I know personally over the years I've tried many different routes to try and get everybody to do this. But sometimes it would take weeks and weeks and weeks at the start of term. So you've heard two really good examples there, and you know, teamwork happening as well, and follow-up, but real commitment to making sure that happens. So good luck with it, because it can sound like a relatively straightforward thing that I know takes quite a bit of time. Okay, so the document contains musts and shoulds, and I think it's important to clarify that a must is what absolutely must happen. There's a legal statutory duty to comply. There is no discussion about whether it could or might or may happen. It must happen, quite simply, to be compliant. And the document very clearly uses must to signify that. And then the shoulds, where it's something that you might follow. Ideally, actually, it's a recommendation. And it's kind of a key nod to what the expectation is, unless there is good reason not to do so. So just to give you that important flavour of the two differences. We come to our key changes in keeping children safe in education 2023. I'm going to take you through the implications of these. And what I'm going to propose that I go through it, the 5 different key areas of change, and then I'm going to pause and welcome you to share kind of what's coming up for you around this in terms of how you're preparing, or things that you're welcoming support on, and would welcome advice from others on. So let's go through it first, and then I'll come to you. So firstly, and this one's a biggie, I think, for DSLs. It's a real big one. Increased expectations and responsibilities around the monitoring of IT systems, and the DSL to be overseeing that. So we'll take a look at that in more detail. Changes in terms of wording around children who are absent from education, some stuff around elective home education, safer recruitment, and I think there's some particularly good stuff around clarifying safer recruitment practices that's very welcome. And another layer, though, for us to be aware of is the use of school premises for non-school activities, and changes to expectations and safeguarding around that. They're important and they make sense, but there's a layer of admin that needs to be factored in as well if your premises are used by external community groups and so on. So let's take a look. Firstly, filtering and monitoring. There are all sorts of systems which can be used for this, to be keeping in place both a firewall to make sure that certain things are being filtered out, stuff that you don't want, that it would be harmful for people, for children and young people, and wholly inappropriate. But it's the monitoring as well of where there are searches to look for certain things that are inappropriate or might be causes for concern around a student's attitude towards themselves or others, and any particular harm that that could pose. So I think it's really important to be aware of this and give it due thought. So 3 key changes, and I've highlighted where these things occur, the pages and the paragraphs. So really clear now that the DSL has responsibility for understanding the filtering and monitoring systems and processes that are in place. That doesn't mean if you are the DSL you have to do it all, but you must know what is happening. And I remember in one of the last colleges I was in, actually, it felt a bit nebulous about the filtering and monitoring. It was happening, and I was thoroughly assured by the head of IT that it was happening, but I didn't really, if I'm absolutely honest, understand all of the intricacies of that. And I began to unpick it and unpick the reporting, and we did quite a lot of work, and it was important work about the reporting, because for a good long while our report was so long that it wasn't really telling me anything, because it was a whole stream of information that could not be analysed readily, simply, to allow decisions to be made in a timely and effective way. So if you are the DSL, or if you're supporting a DSL, this is really something to be giving attention to, because it could be very simply rectified, but there has to be that clarity about what is happening in your school or college around the filtering and monitoring. What does the report look like? How often is the report generated? What's it telling us? And what's then going to be happening about stuff that's coming up that is a cause for concern? I do think this is a really important change. I think my own view is it's a timely change and it's critical, but it does add a layer of clarified work for the DSL that has to be done. Also, you can see in the second point being made that it's really important that there's training for staff at induction when they join the organisation or at the start of the year, so they understand that stuff is being monitored. Now, hopefully they understand that, but I think it's really important to be explicit, because we need their help in doing the monitoring as well, which we'll come on to take a look at the why and what the expectation is. One of the things that you might need to do, if it hasn't been done already, ready for governor sign-off, is to update your child protection policy so that it's explicit about what appropriate filtering and monitoring technology you've got in place on the school's devices and networks. Because it needs to be transparent and it needs to be clear that this is happening. And then, okay, so you're doing the monitoring, what happens next? And this, I'm told, comes from very directly from championing work done by the parents of a young person called Frankie Thomas, who died by suicide because it's thought she had been very influenced by information that she was seeing in school that was inappropriate, that was coming through the dysfunctional firewalls and filtering systems. The filtering and monitoring systems have broken down and nobody had really picked it up. IT hadn't picked it up. And because the DSL thought that was something IT were doing, it wasn't picked up there. And she was able to see things which encouraged her in her views to take action which was fatally harmful to her. So it's as a direct consequence of key championing work done in that particular sphere. So I think it's important, I think it's helpful, but you've got to be really clear on how you're going to be dealing with this, and we can take a look at all of this together and come back and share some thoughts. So what does it mean? We need to make sure that staff responsibilities, and this is what they need to know at the start of term if they don't already, that they need to report any breaches if they witness or suspect unsuitable material has been accessed, including stuff around so-called honor-based abuse materials, okay? And I think the next one is an interesting one, because it really depends upon a culture of trust and transparency and safeguarding, which is that we're calling upon staff to flag if they can access unsuitable materials. Now, that does take trust, because it takes trust on the part of staff to feel that if they say that they've found something, that they're not automatically going to be castigated for having been searching for something that was inappropriate. So if we want this to work in the spirit of the guidance, there really does need to be a culture where people feel that they can come forwards and say if they've seen something. Otherwise, things will remain buried, and that's really, really not helpful. So there's quite a significant piece to do here around culture, I believe. And one of the things that we should be asking them to proactively flag is to say if teaching topics could create unusual activity. So I remember when I was working at a land-based college, there were certain things that students were doing on the game course, which involved guns and ammunition, and good shooting range and so on. That stuff came up in our filtering, checked off with the tutor as to what was going on. It was all totally appropriate in terms of searches, but actually it would have been helpful if we'd known in advance that that was the stuff that was going to be coming up the following week in terms of students studying it and needing to do some research, so we weren't thinking, so to give you that as an example, to have a mechanism in place for staff proactively saying to you as the DSL or within your safeguarding team, whatever mechanism you use, look, actually we're going to be doing this stuff either on, I don't know, peroxide or or guns or sexually harmful behaviour if it's around childcare students. Whatever it might be, getting them to tell you in advance can be so much more advantageous. And one of the things that the staff are also encouraged to do is to let the safeguarding team know if they notice any abbreviations or misspellings which allow access to restricted material. And again, this is down to trust and knowing and believing that they really will be supported if they flag this stuff, and you won't be thinking, what are you looking at that for? So those are some of the key things. I think there might be sort of questions or comments around this, but I'm going to go through the key changes and then we'll come on to them. Now, some of the wording has changed for children who are absent from children who are absent from education. So it's moved from children missing from education to children who are absent. And one of the things that's really explicit now is where a child has an EHCP, the local authority will need to review the plan whilst working closely with the parents. And I know, and I'm sure, I know from past experience, that happens, that the parents or carers are very much involved in the review of the plan. But again, this is now explicit, particularly where there's an impact around attendance and making sure, how can the plan be fulfilled if the child or young person isn't present in education? So that's an important one. And just probably flagging with your Senko that is something that's being factored in from keeping children safe in education. Next up, for elective home education, there is updated guidance around this, and I really recommend that you take a look at the highlighted link document, Working Together to Improve School Attendance. I think it's becoming clear from what's coming out of the DfE, not least in this document, that there are growing concerns around the post-pandemic impact on attendance, and it is going to be something that has an increased focus to look to improve attendance. And if young people are not coming to a setting for their education, it needs to be really clear what is in place for them if they are electing for home education, and keeping a closer eye on that. And you can see there's updated information on how schools should be working with local authorities where absence indicates a potential safeguarding concern. There we go. Now, safer recruitment. I particularly welcome clarification in this section. Because last year we know that Keeping Children Safe in Education, the 2022 document, recommended that schools and colleges should be doing some checks on people who are coming forwards for recruitment to their organisations. But it wasn't necessarily explicit that we needed to tell people that that's what we were doing. Something just a little bit underhand about that. And so for transparency and clarity, it is now necessary for schools and colleges to inform shortlisted candidates that online searches will be done as part of due diligence checks. And I think one of the important things to do here, though, and it's something we've been checking for in the work we've done with education providers on how they're doing this, is also build in a mechanism for being able to check that actually the person you think you found, who's Joe Bloggs, John Smith, Jenny Wren, whoever it might be, actually is the person who's then sitting in front of you, and you're not thinking, good Lord, like what's come up for that person, before you actually meet them at interview. So having a kind of a way of picking that actually identity, if you like, their visual presentation aligns with what you've seen on the internet is important, so that we don't start presuming things about people that isn't that person at all. But I think this is important. And I also particularly welcome the next point about DBSs, that schools and colleges do not have to keep copies of the DBS certificates to fulfill the duty of maintaining the SCR. That's a really important point. We had a client that we worked with over 18 months ago who was really concerned to make sure they were doing the right thing about the length of time for which they were keeping the DBS document and how it should be stored and so on. And actually, it's great that that's now being clarified. And finally, we've been able to say to them, we don't need to worry about that anymore. As long as you've got a mechanism for making sure that you've verified that DBS has been seen, that anything that may have cropped up on the DBS has also been investigated if it's relevant, and what the outcome of that is. But document copies to verify identity, the right to work, and required qualifications should be kept in the personnel HR file. So I hope that's helpful. I certainly think it is, in terms of the support that we've been giving to people. And then the other thing the use of school premises, and wherever it says in the document school, read college as well if you're in a college setting. I know for those of us who work predominantly in colleges for years, it can be a bit irritating sometimes to keep hearing schools, but it relates to colleges as well. So where schools or colleges are having their premises used for extracurricular activities by outside associations, it might be community groups and sports clubs and so on, it's really important that you, as the setting, see their safeguarding policy and procedures. And if there are any concerns that crop up about any staff member, or indeed it could be a parent and their behaviour or a suspicion of abuse, it needs to be really clear that you have a responsibility now around safeguarding, both to see what the safeguarding policy and procedures are for that particular organisation, but if reporting is required to the LADO because of an allegation of abuse or suspected abuse by any of the adults involved in the delivery of those practices, that needs to happen. And you can see the document, it's highlighted here, keeping children safe in out of school settings, for clarity about what arrangements need to be in place around safeguarding for the hirers, okay, and making sure that you check that. And I think that's quite a crucial piece of additional work to be doing, because many of you will have outside agencies which use your settings. It's a very handy additional source of income, as well as being a great way to engage with the community. But it's making sure that they have the policies, the procedures, and they know who's the safeguarding lead in your setting as well, who they should be liaising with, who is checking off that they've got things in place, and making sure that the link is there in the event of needing to refer something on. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and stop sharing at that particular point before we go on to look at a few other things to see, are there any comments or questions around this? Because some of these things are relatively minor. Some of them might take a little bit more work institutionally to make sure you've got things in place. Liz?
Just going back to sort of filtering and monitoring, there are some, I've had a look at keeping children safe in education. There are some useful audit tools, and I think I'm not sure if it was on the same document, but questions for governors as well. So my safeguarding governor is a retired special school head and ex-Ofsted inspector, so very thorough in her questioning. But I think she would struggle on the IT-based stuff. So yeah, I'm going to be liaising with her, and also just liaising with our IT departments as well, making sure that they're really clear. And they're already supporting me with the potential audit as well. So just to say that. Really.
No, that's really handy, and thank you for sharing. When I had to kind of dig deep into this stuff as a DSL to understand what was happening, I used to say to the IT team, like, please, I'm going to have to ask you what might to you seem really obvious questions, but I don't know. And in good faith, I don't know. So, and I always like to say there's no such thing as a daft question. And so I asked what very well could have been daft questions, but I had to understand it. And that's what I'd encourage from all of you, ask what might seem like the crazy question, because I know by asking some of those questions, they were things which IT hadn't thought about, because they were looking at things from strictly an IT systems perspective. I was bringing kind of the user nous to play, to be like, I need to be able to see it in the reports in this format. I need to have it at this time of the week, because this is what I would then need to do, and so on. So working in partnership with them is absolutely crucial. And do ask what may seem like daft questions. So important. So important. Liz, thank you. That's really helpful.
No
Connell, how about you?
Yeah, I was just I've been I've literally spent this week dealing with this, so I've kind of been trained by our IT on how to monitor and how the system works. It just prompted me to think that what Liz said was about governors. Is it worth putting into our governor reports, where we do our safeguarding bit, just something just to even just confirm it's been monitored, whether you've had to look at something and what the outcome was, just so it keeps it on the burner for governors?
Absolutely, that is a brilliant idea. And I think I think it's good as well if even if you're naming the system that's used, you know, the
Yeah,
firewall system, and how often are the reports being generated? Who's looking at them? And like you say, how many issues have come out of it? And it's okay to say, as I often would, where it was like, well, 22 things were flagged, of which 21 of them were entirely understandable because the students were doing something on, you know, gun use that week. But the other one, we're looking into it because a student was looking at self-harming materials late at night.
yeah. It was
You
quite
know,
fun because I'm going to use it in training next week. That on our first monitoring, a member of staff came up with 18 pornography searches, and when I looked into the system, they were on IKEA looking at children's rugs, and it came
yeah,
up under the system. So I've been able to now put IKEA into the not restricted workload, but for some reason, children's rugs came up as a pornography term. I've never heard of
God,
it, but I think that's good for
no,
part of the training, just to flag up that's what the system's doing. But the governors, I think,
absolutely
Hello,
right.
you're right.
Yeah. Kay, if you could go on mute, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, and that's a really good point. And you know, I myself, I remember in a previous DSL role, had a couple of occasions when I was supporting students with safeguarding issues and searching for things that were relevant, and that came up on our system as being, you know, inappropriate. So I had to say to IT, look, I think actually you need to know what I was, you know, what I was doing and what I was looking for. And your partnership working as DSLs and safeguarding teams with the IT team is crucial, but none more so than now that it's absolutely explicit. So good. I hope that's given food for thought and some ideas. And if you haven't already spoken to IT, ping them a message and get that happening. But Connell, great ideas around reporting to governors as well. It's really important that they have that insight. Um, okay, I'm going to go back to sharing on a few things. And I think I need to whiz ahead on here. Hang on, forgive me a second. In this version, I'm going to whiz through, she says. Hang on, just 1 second while I find it back where I'd actually got up to. Good. Can you see that now? Emma, can you see that okay?
No, not at the moment.
Ah, right. Let me just come back out and try and go back in. Share screen. Good. Ba, 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 ba.
There we go.
All right, lovely. From current slide, great. Now, there is a clarity in keeping children safe in education, which I think is really handy, that it is appropriate sometimes to take positive action where it can be shown that pupils or students are facing disadvantage disproportionately if they have certain protected characteristics. So in order to meet their specific need, actually particular action can be taken to benefit them in a particular way, because if you like, the playing field is not level to start with. And one example that's given is taking positive action to support girls if there's evidence that they're being disproportionately subjected to sexual harassment. Another example might be if you've got students who are from the LGBTQ plus community who are being disproportionately affected by bullying or harassment and so on, taking positive action to support them. It is entirely reasonable to do that. And I think there have been concerns sometimes, not only in the context of safeguarding, but the wider context of education around what is and isn't appropriate to do under the Equality Act of 2010. But actually, it's now explicit in keeping children safe in education that positive action sometimes is really important as a mechanism for supporting those who are being disproportionately affected. And it is also entirely reasonable to be making adjustments for children and young people with a disability. So that's nicely tidied up. Useful links here, which we can also send out to you actually afterwards. I'll make a note, and Emma, and remind me when we finish. I'll make sure that you've got these links as well that complement keeping children safe in education. You'll know about part 1 and where to find that on the government website, but filtering and monitoring standards as well, which is really helpful in the context of what we've been talking about. Cyber security standards for schools and colleges, working together to improve school attendance, and the stuff around out of school settings and keeping children safe, and also the regulated activity in relation to children and the scope for that is included. So we'll make sure you get sent those links by email subsequently as well. And just some key reminders really about keeping children safe in education. We've got everything that everybody needs to know in part 1, of course, but it really is about making sure that we provide a safe environment for learning, and trusted relationships are going to be absolutely critical to that, as ever they are, to encourage children and young people to really communicate what's happening in their lives and therefore how we can best support them. And some really important reminders in Annex B of the document. I'm just going to check the page. Yeah, we've got that around in Annex B about issues which put children at extra risk of harm and what we need to be looking out for. And then taking proactive measures. So it's very clear in keeping children safe in education that we need to be teaching around safeguarding, preventative education, to be really preparing pupils and students for modern life. And that might come during your PSHE sessions, but also embedded within the wider curriculum. And looking at low-level concerns as well to make sure that we intervene early in the lives of children and young people. There's a big emphasis on early intervention and working with the local authorities around that with early help assessments as appropriate, and really understanding what those local processes are. And then making sure that you can identify and manage child-on-child sexual harassment and violence issues as well. And in part 5 of the document, you've got guidance around that, which is important. Some things to really keep watch on, which have come out and the DfE are really preoccupied with now, and none of these will be a surprise to you. I've already mentioned attendance, but student behaviour, child-on-child abuse or peer-on-peer abuse is what often it's referred to in colleges, misogyny and misogynistic behaviour, and sexual harassment and mental health, which is ongoing stuff for us to be keeping watch on. But those are some of the really key issues. And as Emma and I move forwards with our programme of safeguarding events in the year ahead, where we'll be offering all sorts of complementary sessions at least once a month, we will be looking to be doing some focus work on these particular issues as well, and supporting you with ideas and peer support around this. Next up, just for information, next up in our safeguarding programme of events, we've got Hifsa Haroon Iqbal OBE, who's going to be talking on the morning of Friday, the 29th of September, around Prevent. Key updates around Prevent. She's the former FE and HE Prevent coordinator for the West Midlands, and she's now CEO of her own company supporting people with EDI and Prevent specialist work. So Hifsa's very kindly agreed to give us an hour on the morning of Friday, the 29th of September. We'll make sure you've got a link for that to follow in the week ahead. It'd be great to see you there for those updates of really critical stuff that you need to know and where we're up to with the Prevent agenda. So those are the essentials for now. I'm going to stop sharing, and I really welcome any comments, thoughts that you think might be helpful, guidance that you'd like, anything that you'd like more information on that we can support with in the remaining time that we've got.
Can I say something, please?
Yeah, please go on, Emma.
So this isn't wanting to throw a spanner in the filtering monitoring works. I think there's some really good practice going on. But what I would say is when I speak to clients about this, one of the biggest concerns people have is we can put all the systems in the world in place on the school and college internet, but especially if I can see Liz kind of going, yeah, especially if you're working with, and let's be honest now, year 5, year 6 upwards, a lot of them have got mobile phones in their school bags, and in colleges often in their hands. And how do we stop that? And I wish I had an answer. You know, we can say we'll put a really rigorous policy in place, we'll be very clear on our expectations, But again, wouldn't it be naive to think that our expectations will always be met by young people? Because they won't. And I think really I'm just throwing it out there to say, has anybody kind of cracked this? Has anybody got a really good way? Because, you know, I know when I was at school, it was if you have a phone, which I didn't, there's no phones in the classroom, you don't have them. If it's in school, it's in your bag and it's out of sight until the bell goes. I've been in schools recently where teachers have said, oh, that was great. Okay, let's have a look at that. So everybody get your phones out and go onto Google. And they're being used as a learning tool in the classroom, which is fabulous, but we've got no control over that. So I'm just really, I think my question really is, has anybody got any ideas of how we can make sure that this fabulous filtering and monitoring stretches to the smart technology that everybody's got in their pocket?
Great question, Liz.
Well, this is something that I do lose sleep about, particularly because most of our students are young adults. And how do you stop them using Grindr in the library and that sort of stuff when they're on the phone? So what I've been saying in my safeguarding briefings to staff, we're very lucky that we're highly staffed because we're a specialist environment. But actually, the library is staffed. The outside areas we have staff. It's their responsibility to be extra vigilant, that we need to make sure that students are being appropriate and also to alert us if there's any difficulties. But that's as far as I've got really in terms of practically, yes, they're young adults, but we have rules and regulations, parents forums to try and talk to parents about responsibilities at home, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm struggling beyond that.
Thank you, Liz. It is a tricky one. It was a great question, Emma. And I can see a question from Joe as well around updates to working together to safeguard children. I'm told, Joe, that there will be some updates due. I don't know when, but we're keeping an eye out for that. And when that happens, I feel sure we'll put on a session, either Emma or I, to make sure that we take you through those key updates as well. So we'll keep watch and we'll keep you posted. No, that's great. No, I don't believe we've missed it, but we're waiting in hot anticipation of that. So thank you. Any other comments or queries? Anything that either you're kind of, how about more broadly, not just on the specifics of the updates, but are there particular things that you're going to be doing this year within the wider safeguarding context that you're either excited about, pleased about, or is perhaps a pilot, a new way of working that that you feel you might like to share? Because it's great sometimes just to get a bit of inspiration from people about what next. Anything anybody wants to share? No. Faye, how about you? You've appeared.
I have. I've been listening intently. Thanks, Trudy. One of the things I think should be in the pipeline for us, I watched a DFE webinar on low-level concerns, and I know I've touched base with you on it, and thinking about how we work as a trust and have we got a real depth of understanding and a consensus around what would warrant a low-level concern, and how do staff then record that? What actions do they take? And that 1 hour DFE webinar with secondary colleagues presenting actually got me thinking from a primary perspective, what steps we might take as a trust to support staff on identifying and recording and deciding what steps to take around low-level concerns.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And like I said, we had a conversation about it, didn't we, a few weeks back? And Emma and I are really looking forward to working with you on that this academic year. But that very point is something that could be of benefit to others. And the DFE webinar that you mentioned is well worth a look at, isn't it, on low-level concerns? So if you haven't seen it yet, we really recommend that you take a look. And there are a few others in that series too. I think there were about 3, weren't there, that are all really quite useful. So thanks, Faye. That's a really brilliant point. Something that I think could be very, very useful for the wider group, actually. Good. Anybody else? Celia.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm trying to put my camera on, but I can't. Hiya.
Hey.
Hiya, sorry. I just
Where are you based, Celia?
So I'm in Salford, in a primary school in Salford.
Great.
So I wanted to ask about, and it's not that I want to magpie someone's quiz, but I've just kind of found out last night that 9 o'clock on Monday I'm doing a safeguarding presentation, because I thought someone else was doing it, but anyway. And so I was thinking of doing a quiz. Where would you suggest would be the best place to look for a quiz so that I can get some ideas and it'd be a little bit quicker for me to put things together?
Emma, I don't know what you think, but one of my suggestions is around the Facebook group for DSLs. Actually, there's some really good sharing that goes on in there. Hey, Emma, can you remember the
I'm just going to pull it up now. Let me just have a quick look.
Thank you. We'll let
what
you
I would
know.
say on that, there are some really fabulous things in there. There are also some, check what it is before you share it, is all I would say. So there are some really fabulous resources, but there are some that I've looked at and thought these look great, and then when you click through, they're maybe not structured quite how we would structure them, or they're not quite right. So just have a really good look before you share them. But yes, it is a really good platform, and it is called Designated Safeguarding Lead Support Network Group.
Okay.
So if I show you on Facebook, I don't know if this will work very well. It looks like that.
Okay.
That's the one, isn't it, Trudy?
Okay.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
And we keep an eye on what's going on in there. And like Emma says, you'll have discernment, but it's sometimes you just kind of need a few little snippets to kind of go, okay, I could do something like that, and then a little bit of that, and so on. And people have been sharing quite a lot on there recently, because if the time of year it is, and things have landed on their desk just like they've landed on yours.
Yes.
What I would say as well, Celia, is SurveyMonkey is quite good to use. So if you decide you do want to make your own, it can be quite quick, and it's quite user friendly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
One of the things I did last year, Celia, for somebody was really basic quiz, literally on part 1, every section of part 1. It's like, what relevant question can I ask that relates to the key paragraphs in part 1? Because that's what all staff needed to know. And then if you've got time, see if you can test it out though on a couple of colleagues, even if they'd be willing to do it tomorrow if you haven't got it finished by the end of today. You could even test it out on us. I'd be happy to have a go tomorrow. Just because I remember doing a quiz many moons ago that ended up being quite contentious, with lots of people deciding that you could have a different answer. You need it to be both reasonably testing, but not to have contentious answers. So if you want to test drive it with anybody, I'm sure Emma and I would be willing to have a go. And just let us know.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. It's really helpful.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other comments or points to share, or questions? Anything we can help with? Or indeed anything that you particularly might like to see coming forwards in our safeguarding programme of events? So like I say, we've got HIFSA coming up with Prevent, but if there's anything else that you think, oh, that would be really handy, we're very happy to try and twist the arms of people we know to see if they'll do a session for us. Yeah, Faye.
Trudy, one thing that I think would be interesting, and it was another one of those DFE webinars on the link I've posted on the chat, was and you talked about mobile phones, was around sexting. And one of the webinars is around that. And of course, from a primary perspective, we think, gosh, what's the implications then for our curriculum and our approaches as children have more access? But it was quite interesting around, again, there's some great colleagues online talking about how they approach some of those issues and what steps they would take if something happened in their school or college. So yeah, something around sexualized behaviors and sexting, particularly with the filtering and monitoring and keeping children safe. I think something for us, particularly thinking from a primary perspective, what knowledge and measures should we have in place in a primary setting that prepares children for secondary?
Excellent. We will add that to our list. We can certainly look to put something together on that. And also because we're working with people right across the education sector, we can be finding out what people are doing in their settings and bringing it to bear as well to help everybody.
Can I just jump in there again? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Faye, you're exactly right in what you're saying, preparing children for secondary. I completely agree with that. However, I have recently worked with a case where there was some quite intense sexting going on. And this was a year three child. Some of these children from kind of 5, 6, 7, you know, it doesn't have to be a mobile phone. It might be that they play on the family switch and there's a chat function on a game, or it's not just a case of sending text messages, although that kind of where our brain goes, or where my brain goes anyway, from where the term sexting originally came from. You know, children are talking in videos on YouTube, comments on YouTube videos, they're talking on, like I say, Nintendo Switch games. It might be that they've got older brothers or sisters with PlayStations and Xboxes. It really isn't anymore our secondary staff that need to be concerned about sexting and inappropriate behaviour online. It really does come from very, very young. You know, I've got a 5-year-old. Now, I swore my kids wouldn't have technology, but I've got a 5-year-old who can quite easily use an iPad. Yeah. And yes, his writing isn't, you know, quite up there yet. His spelling's not brilliant. He's not going to be sending inappropriate messages, but he could receive inappropriate images.
Yes, definitely, and we deal with it certainly more rarely, but the webinar really got me thinking, because it was very clear it's not a secondary issue.
It's not anymore, no.
And how equipped are our colleagues in primary to spot, to support, to know what steps to take, because sometimes it could be as critical as contacting the police. Have we got that working knowledge, because it is very much real from a much younger age?
I think one of the key things as well is we kind of come at it, or I certainly think from experience, we come at it from, okay, how can we educate these children not to do this? But actually, it's very difficult to stop them receiving things. You know, like I say, my youngest, if he gets with his friends, a lot of the friends just want to watch YouTube videos on the TV. Well, there's comments scrolling up from the bottom of these videos, and, you know, they're exposed to these things, and it's really difficult. I think for parents, it's really difficult. And as educators, people look to us to have the answers. And actually, I don't know what the answer is there, because technology is everywhere and it's fabulous, and we embed it in the curriculum, and that's great. But we all know it can be used for other things too, which makes it quite difficult to police.
Absolutely. Faye, when we do the safeguarding training work the week after next with the head teachers, we'll do some stuff around that specifically, particularly around the what nots to do, while we also help to figure out a session that we can do particularly on proactive stuff and gleaning what's going on that is working well in settings that we know, and what challenges there are in sharing. So thank you. It's a really, really good point. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes. If anybody else has any other questions or anything you'd like to share, anything that we can help with either now or put in our bank of stuff that we're going to be picking up moving forwards for you. Okay. Right, well, if that is it, all that remains to say is thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope it's been useful and beneficial for you. And Emma and I wish you all the very best as you set about keeping children safe in education in the year ahead. The work that you do is absolutely critical and so important. And we'll continue to try to think of ways to help you as you help others. And we wish you all the very best for the year ahead, and have a great weekend in the meantime. And Celia, if you do want to send us your quiz through, feel free to do that and we'll take a look. Right, all the best to everybody, and I'll make sure you get sent the recording as well. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.